All right, it's going to Facebook now from Zoom. Okay, great. We are live. Thank you for being patient with us, everyone. As we all know, in the world of technology, sometimes tools are fantastic and sometimes they have a mind of their own, but we just take a deep breath and we roll with it. So that's just how we do it. So if you missed the beginning, I'll just start fresh. We're here with Katie Mutaras and Kristen Zimke. They are the co-authors of the fantastic Read the World, Rethinking Literacy for Empathy and Action in a Digital Age, as well as Amplify Digital Teaching and Learning in the K-6 Classroom. And they have been doing this type of thinking and teaching and learning for a long time. And so we feel really honored to be able to share this conversation with them tonight. We had a conversation a few weeks ago, actually a week or so ago, and there just wasn't enough time. We needed more. So we're here tonight. We'll be back again next week and continue this conversation about what this can look like for kids. Yeah, so I'm thinking about last week, and there was a lot of conversation about depth over coverage and thinking of, reflection for planning ahead. And so I thought a really good place to start would be to think about, what are the conversations that you two have been having with people so far about plans for the fall? What does this look like, do you think?
Great to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for having Katie and I. And Jacqueline, thanks for working through the tech stuff. Exactly like you said, this will happen. Like, we don't have to freak out or like get super sweaty. Like I remember there was a day where I get like so sweaty about it. And you just say to students, like, you know what, just give me a second. I'm learning too, right? And so much of what we're doing, we know in the classroom that so much of what we do for skills and strategies is modeling. We can't forget that we're modeling behind the screen as well, whether it be figuring out a tech workaround or showing like our emotional state or, really being present in the moment. That's all modeling. And so I think like one of the things Katie and I have talked about recently was just about really revisiting and paying attention to your word choice, like following Peter Johnson's choice words, strategies, and then really being intentional about actions, because we know students will pick up on how we are modeling in this new environment and how we're interacting as well. So thanks for being a trooper with that, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you had a plan B. And that's always important with technology. Like, if this doesn't work, how is it going to look?
Absolutely. We did end up our last time, and we ran out of time actually to talk a little bit about what teaching and learning looks like and where we need to be. And I listened to just the last little bit of our chat from last week to make sure we were following up on that piece. And in last week's conversation, Katie said, and I thought this was so important. She said, "Kids don't need the flash and dazzle, but they need substance, connection, authentic audience, and choice." And I think like that's a great starting point for us to think about what's next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I was thinking about that, and it's so tempting sometimes to want to do all the things and be this performer. And I think as teachers we do that sometimes. We perform when we're reading aloud to kids, we're doing the voices and we're on stage. And technology has some fun bits and pieces to it. So can you use those? Absolutely. But if we're trying to perform for kids all the time, we're missing that connection with them, right? Or the opportunity to have that connection. And I also don't think that the flash and dazzle is really a sustainable model. I think that we have to do things that are sustainable for kids and for teachers and for families. And that conversation, I think, going into next year, it really is this like triad that we're moving forward as equal partners, the teachers, the kids, and the whoever is home with them, if someone is home with them. And I want to acknowledge that because not all of our students have someone home with them. So we have to really be communicating with one another, listening more so than we ever have before, to really understand what is that scenario for each individual child, and how does that fit into what I can provide, or better yet, what my team can provide. I think the biggest thing we can do for ourselves moving into next year. I told Kristen she was going to talk about this first, but then I just got an idea, so I'm
I
gonna
know
talk.
where you're going, so roll with it.
So I think the biggest thing we can do is build our team. And we cannot do this in isolation. So whatever is holding us in an isolated place, we have to kind of get over that and reach out to others, because we need that support. We need to be able to specialize a little bit moving forward, and have that collaboration and that feeling of being supported by our colleagues. Because the truth is, as teachers, and it's kind of what I started to say last week, I think when our sound went out, one of the most important things we can do is make sure that we're all okay. Because now, as we're talking about all these different models for next year, it's very overwhelming. I'm hearing things that we're going to be asked to do that go against maybe our beliefs, our pedagogical beliefs, or what we believe is good for kids, because we have to do it in the name of their safety. And I think that a lot of us are also juggling our own families and wondering, like, what happens if I'm working full time and my child is on an AB schedule? Where's my child going those other 3 days a week? And is my child going to an elderly grandparent's house? And where's the risk there? So, like, there's a lot for us as teachers. And so I think, as educators, we have to bind together and move as a cohesive support unit for one another. I think that's going to be really key moving forward next year.
So many good thoughts there that we can spend a little bit of time unpacking. Katie and I have been thinking about this for a long time, but some of our thinking really started to come together in the last 2 weeks or so. And one of the big things that we realized that leadership teams and teachers and the greater community needed to think about was just what do we do to simplify this teaching and learning experience for families, for students, for educators, and get back to the heart of what really matters. And I don't know if Jacqueline, you can maybe just drop in that chart that I shared, or Brett, if you're in the chat, dropping it in. But Katie and I really did some thinking, and then finally I pulled it all together in a culmination. And let me just see if I can pull that up to share with you right now.
Yeah, I actually have it here if you want me to.
I got it. I can drop
cool.
it in there. Let's see, is this big enough? There you go. Can you guys see?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, it's super not fancy. You can also see my messiest desktop in the world because it was one of those days. But lots of times I organize my thinking in a large picture, a large thinking format. And I spoke with my friend, Darren Hudgens, maybe about 10 days ago, and he does a lot of work for leading schools and conferences on the West Coast, but he used the term emergency teaching. And I think that this was such a transformative moment for me, because I realized it's not, what we did was not distance learning. It was not remote learning. It was not digital learning. It was emergency teaching. And I think, words are important for me as well. And so when we look at this piece of emergency teaching, I think that signals digital learning can be so much more. We can do this so much better with the background knowledge that we have now and some time to plan. I also think the language of teaching versus learning puts the onus on the situation and the adults, not the kids, right? So when we go back and talk about in remote learning, what did our kids do? It's not our students' fault by any means that any of this happened. And in many instances, it's not our fault either, but we're in this place that was a true emergency. And many times more than crossing off standards or meeting academic criteria, we are focused on being healthy, taking care of each other, supporting our family or our siblings, and essentially, staying alive in this crazy crisis. And so many of our thoughts just wrap around this idea and get us thinking about, okay, what's next and what do we need to do? I think, Katie talked about some of the challenges that are out there. And I think one thing that we need to recognize is that we can't take the 8:40 to 3:20 school day and just hold it on a Zoom call and recognize that that's a classroom day. Like that's not how digital learning works. I'm sure if anyone's been working from home, you know how exhausting being on a Zoom call is. But what we really need to look to do is craft moments of super focused face-to-face or asynchronous learning, and then provide kids time to actually do the work. For me, it lines up a lot like independent reading, where, we teach these strategic many lessons and then we send kids off to practice doing the real work of reading in order to gain those skills.
Yes, yes to all that. I'm sorry, I'm distracted because apparently my patio guy just decided to stop by and is traipsing through my backyard. So that's amazing. This is real life. This is life on Zoom. Um,
Yeah.
and teaching digitally, which is your work life and your home life colliding at the worst possible moment, I think.
No, it is true.
I think something important about what you said, Kristen, is this concept of trying to recreate the school day exactly as it was. We have an opportunity to make some revisions, to make some bold changes here. And that means that we can expect kids to be a little more independent and give them that choice. But Kristen and I always advocate for supporting them in that and teaching them how to do that and scaffolding them into that work. I know at the elementary level, sometimes parents come back and they say, well, it's easier for me if my kid is on the Zoom because then I don't have to manage it. And as a parent, I get that, like you're trying to do your thing and you're juggling. But at the same time, we know that, it's not necessarily best practice to have a child on this format all day long. And so we have to think about, like, when we're structuring our lessons or we're structuring it, how are we sort of replicating, in a workshop model, they're not with me the whole time, just like Kristen said, like there's some instruction and then there's an expectation for independence. But they're not at independent day one of school, right? So we have to think about how do we slowly work them up to that, and set some expectations and some checking measures in place so that they know that you'll be coming back to check and to have that conversation with them about what they were reading or what they were writing or the mathematics work that they were working on. And so they've got that sense of, okay, I need to do this, I'm going to have a conversation. There's a little bit of accountability there.
Absolutely. And I think what you said right there was opportunity. And I think the schools that are going to be successful are going to be the ones that make those bold moves and those strong decisions. And I think, just as you were talking, we've known for decades that teenage students learn better later in the day. But because of sports schedules and extracurriculars, the days started earlier, and sometimes kids have a 0 hour to get an extra class in. And we know that's not best for their development or their health. So maybe we start elementary early and high school later. There's just so many opportunities to rethink what we've always done. And I think where we could possibly find pitfalls is if we try to do what we've always done in a completely different format and setting. So I'm hoping that we can, like as a group and together and with colleagues across the course of the next couple of weeks, think about where do we want to adjust, what do we want to push, and how can we do it better for our students. And there's going to need to be a lot of advocacy from child development perspectives, from academic perspectives. I was just reading an article the other day that was talking about, the language of being behind and who's pushing that language of kids are going to be so far behind. And so often it's multi-billion dollar companies that have a vested interest in testing or online curriculum. And so their definition of behind could possibly be quite different than our definition of where kids should be from a developmental perspective.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that conversation too, and was anxious to hear the perspective from both of you on that, because I think it's everywhere. And so, yeah, Katie, I mean, you sound like you are ready to talk on that, so go for it.
I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on the topic, and I don't know if any of them are backed up by research, but they're just musings, really. And I just think, we have really amped up the expectations for kids in the last 10 years, maybe. And I think a lot of early childhood people would say that we've amped up those expectations to an unrealistic degree. So I wonder if really we won't be behind by previous measures or standards, but only because of what these companies, are putting out and saying. I think it's a worthwhile conversation for us to have. And this is never a good excuse, but I mean, I just think when we grew up, I was in kindergarten and I was smearing paste on my face. I certainly wasn't reading. So I just think like the expectation has gone a little haywire. So I think we just need to, keep that in mind and have those conversations as kids are coming back. And I think the most important, notwithstanding, the most important thing we can do is to not be deficit focused when they're coming back or when we're having conversations. We have to do some active adjustment of the terminology and words that we use when we talk about kids, distance emergency teaching or no emergency teaching, because anytime we're using terminology like struggling and behind and slow and low, what does that really mean? And that's framing up how we view children. So and certainly it's something that those words still come out of my mouth sometimes, and I'm like, wait a minute, don't say that, don't frame it up like that. I started using Steph Harvey's terminology, striving, when they wrote a book, and I thought that felt a little more like appropriate to me, but I still don't even know if that's the right word. But I do think words matter, and so the words we use to talk about kids and where they're at matters a lot.
There's a great article from this week in the Washington Post, and I think one of you guys are going to drop it into the Facebook comments there, about the title of it is, "Can We Stop Telling Corona Kids How Little They're Learning?" And, it goes back to that piece of what are we modeling? What are the words that we're using? But really details like what kids are learning at home, and those pieces of caution your assumptions just because they maybe weren't on your Zoom call or didn't show up for your asynchronous lessons doesn't mean that they weren't learning in some other way. And it doesn't mean that they didn't have an experience that was worthwhile. And so whether you're just entering summer or you're looking to close out the year, I think that article is so helpful for how we frame things and our mindset about a strengths model for kids moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, this was something that, when we were talking about what you were all going to talk about tonight, this is sort of leading me into who do we need to hear from? So if we're thinking about the different experiences that kids are having when they don't log into that Zoom call, if they don't submit that one seesaw assignment, whose voices should be at the table when we consider what this looks like for kids?
I think kids.
Kids,
Kids
number
voices
one.
to be at the table, right? I was on a Google Meet with a colleague in Vancouver, Washington today, and her first graders, and they're so savvy. They're using the chat by now, and like they can tell you what went well and what they'd like to see as a next step. So I think speaking with kids across the ages is a really important first step.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's the most important group of people that can be at the table right now. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stakeholders involved. There's, families and caregivers, teachers, anybody that the district has community partnerships with, whether it's for childcare, before and after care, or mental health or health services, because every decision that the district makes or a school makes about when and where kids will be has a ripple effect to all these other institutions. And so they need to be, understanding what those plans are, because they'll need to change how they operate so that they can continue to support families too. So I think
a lot of it is going to be listening for the first little bit. And then I think this all merges together at the confluence of relationships and looking at like, how did we tee up those relationships for kids and teachers, kids and counselors, families and teachers, principals. One school that I work with just did a great job of asking parents for feedback on progress reports and the end of the year assessment that they did. What is your child doing well? What do you think they need to work on? Like all of those pieces, because now it's more kaleidoscopic, right? Like many people are entering and thinking in that conversation. And I feel like the relationship piece is huge. I just read a piece from Dr. Clark McCowan earlier this week where he talked about students who had a strong relationship going into COVID-19 learning at home showed up for class more frequently and completed more assignments than students who reported they didn't have a meaningful relationship with that teacher. And so, we've been talking about SEL and we've been talking about community pieces. I think a lot of places have done a really good job of that from a distance. I think that's something that needs to almost be the foundation of where we start our work next year. And it's that piece that we keep coming back to. Social emotional learning is a practice. It's not a unit that we cross off. It's not a once a week mindful Monday, but it's something that we're modeling and practicing throughout the year. And then that just goes right together with those relationships.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to planning planning for the beginning of the year, because if we are in a situation, if your school's in a situation where you are not starting in a classroom face to face, you're going to have to take the time to try and build those relationships as best you can, whether that's through phone calls or conferences or, surveys and forums, or driving to kids' houses and sitting on the driveway and talking to them from a safe distance. I think that will pay a huge impact on what you're able to accomplish with kids over the year.
And I think like the relationship piece is just so important because it is it's a entry point to creating equitable conditions for kids. And I think whatever we do for the next little bit needs to address some of the equity things that we've seen, whether it be device access, internet access, access to teachers or food or healthcare during a time when kids aren't at school. There are so many hurdles that we need to cross with that. Or start addressing with that, and then really looking at, okay, so we've learned a lot about digital things, but then how do we plan for kids that don't have internet access? How do we plan for families that choose not to put their child on a device all day? How do we plan for families that might choose not to send their child back to school, even if schools are reopened? And I think like that goes back to what we started the conversation with, and Katie led with this idea of simplifying. Yes, in the last 3 months, you probably tried like 99 things under the sun and went to try to figure out something that would work. But now, knowing what we know now, thinking about what would a really robust distance learning plan look like moving forward, we go back and pick maybe those, 8 to 10 tools, 8 to 12 tools. And then we really think about, how are we teaching comprehension? How are we getting kids to connect? How are we getting them to be curious? And really look at like those simple ways to do that.
So knowing that a lot of what you just said is going to be new to teachers, thinking about, the end goal, what is it that we want teachers to be looking for? Can you two talk about micro progressions and talk about how we approach this from through a skills-based lens?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, micro progressions, it's something that I learned about from Kate and Maggie Roberts, and they have a lovely book called DIY Literacy, and a blog that they do. And using that concept of figuring out, okay, where are my kids at? And then what are the tiny steps that they're going to take to grow? That is a strategy that is across subject area. It applies to print and digital tools. It helps us to know what it is that we're looking for. And I think a lot of people, I noticed last week, people were asking about assessment. It's a common question. And so, I have a couple responses to that. First of all, I think in this situation, you can absolutely use the digital tools to have kids share more traditional work products, right? There's nothing wrong. In fact, I would embrace kids still having a notebook to do that work in, and they can post a snapshot of that and upload that to Seesaw. But instead of just sharing it, right? If you were in school, maybe you collect them and look at them. They can add a reflection to it, or they can say something that they want you to pay special attention to, or they can share a challenge that they had, or a question that they'd like to talk to you about the next time they have a conference time with you. That my favorite phrase, at first I was thinking, but now I think, or now I learned, right? And show that evolution of thought. So that's one way to go about that assessment. But we also have new ways to assess, right? We've got all of these tools. And so if we embrace the fact that we need kids to stay engaged, and we know that like inquiry-based and project-based learning has high engagement, we can think about, how can I use some of these digital or creative tools, or if you're not working with devices, some more like murals and posters and things like that. But if we're using digital tools, how do I then assess those, right? And it's not dramatically different than how you would assess any other work product. You're still looking for development and skills. You're supporting kids. You're being very explicit in what it is that they need to accomplish. I've found that providing kids with checklists to work from is really helpful for them, because then they understand, what are my expectations? What are the things I'm supposed to be thinking about? It helps them embrace the revision process, right? We use checklists for writing. Let's use them for when we're making a clips movie. So I think that component of it can be easy to make a sheet with like points, and I'm not going to knock that, because I think any port in a storm. But I also think that we can do those progressions and those rubrics that really show kids, here's where I'm at, but like here's what it would look like if I wanted to go a step further. And it serves as not just an assessment, but also some feedback for them to help them drive excellence. And I think that's really important.
I think that piece is huge. And I see, this increase in digital as just the best way that we can provide
Yeah.
feedback, and for learners of all ages through audio comments or through
Mhm.
videos with Flipgrid, now you can have private videos and a room for different kids and like all of these different ways that we can make feedback easy. I think back to the days where I used to write on a post-it note and my hand would cramp up like, great work, next time try to, and I would do that for
Mhm.
30 plus kids. Well, now I can just click a button and have a one directional conference, right? It's
Right.
conferring one directionally with a student, whether it be in Google Slides or Docs or Flipgrid. There's so many ways to give feedback. And we know from Hattie's work that the feedback piece is what nudges kids to develop and grow.
Yes. And I would say too, like to add on to that, that we have to explicitly teach them how to access that feedback.
Yeah.
We have to make time in our schedule. I know a lot of teachers are pushing out, some executive functioning type things to help kids. There has to be a place like log into such and such, check
Mm-hmm.
feedback from teacher, because they won't, they won't do it. They're like, oh, I gotta get it done. I can show a couple things, Jacqueline. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here,
Yep,
just
you can
to
share.
share, just an example of what I'm talking about. So these are just some slides that talk about if a kid's going to use. This was for clips for a lab report, but using clips. So a student is doing an experiment at home. So we're going to scaffold them through. Okay, well, what are you going to keep, right? Record it. Frame what you're trying to show, get close enough so that we can see it. We have to give some of these specifics. As a teacher, we're going to give an example of what this looks like. You can use a storyboard to make a quick plan, right? We share a blank storyboard. Some kids really thrive on that level of organization, whereas other kids need to just record all the clips and then kind of sort them around and do it in their own way. Sharing, that you can use posters or labels or stickers or effects to enhance your lab report. And we talk about that. Okay, so I'm not going to use rainbow unicorns, but if I can find something that relates to it, that improves my message. And then we prompt them, how do I review and revise it? Well, watch your project all the way through. You'd be surprised how many kids don't do that. Use a checklist to help you make sure you have all the important parts. Watch it one more time just to be sure. And that's teaching them that habit of like, yeah, we go back and we reread it several times before we get going. This is from Amplify, how to make a book video or book blog. So if we want kids to do that as an assessment piece or to build community, then we want to give them an idea of what does that look like and how should that, how can they do that? Here's an example of a checklist. So it's very simple. This would be for, first or second grader, just like, do I have it or not yet? Very simple for them to go back and check. And another one from Amplify, a reflection checklist for a book review video, right? So just an idea of what some of those tools look like. We have more tools like that in our books and on our website as well. And but just to share, sometimes it's easier to see things.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone's asking in the comments, they're saying, I would love to know some good ways to help our teachers with planning their days. I hear it's challenging. I mean, you mentioned earlier, we can't plan for the 8:20 to 2:40. So what is that shift in thinking? How are we planning for the day now?
Mm-hmm. We have a couple
Yeah,
examples of that on our website that we have for distance learning. So if people want to check those hard copies out, those are there. But go ahead, Katie.
yeah, I've had a lot of really good conversations with teachers lately, and I think it looks very different depending on grade level and your own style. But what I'm seeing happen is that and teachers have what first of all they have one place, one home base where families are going to get the information for the day. I just had a really lovely example shared with me by a fourth grade teacher that I work with. She used Google Slides, and she had the slides are color coded by subject, which was really helping her kids who needed help with executive functioning. They liked that it was one thing to look at a time. And right in there, she has her mini lessons embedded. She has a slide that says which kids are on for conferring for the day. She's got, some choice things. And so there's an element of structure because they know that consistently they're going to have a synchronous meeting time with the teacher at specific times during the day across the week, right? If we say like 9 o'clock, we're on for 15 minutes together in our morning to kind of get things going. But then they can also see when is it that I'm scheduled to meet with my teacher in a small group or conferring, and some lessons from the trenches that I'm getting from a lot of the teachers I work with are that the synchronous time is most valuable when they are building that relationship with kids. And so they found that, at first I think everyone started, they got on Zoom and they were doing all their mini lessons through Zoom. And a lot of the teachers that I've talked with said, what, I found more power in recording my lessons. Kids access them when it works for them, and I do my synchronous work in small groups conferring, or we do like a class read aloud, or I have office hours at the end of the day or at a certain time in the morning where kids can jump on and ask any clarifying questions. So while you might push out a schedule to families that in some way kind of mirrors a school day. Like if you look at the schedules on ours, it kind of mirrors that, but the kids aren't with the teacher on Zoom that whole schedule. There are lots of times when they are sort of independently working on things. They're checking in with their LMS, or they've just gotten out of a conference and they know what they need to do. So I think that, of course, you have to be responsive to your developmentally appropriate activities and what works best for certain kids. But I do think some consistency in schedule is helpful just for kids who are getting multiple services, because our specialists have to adapt to what's going on with our schedules too, so that they can meet with kids. But
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, I think that's so great. And I want to get back to just something you talked about with the assessment. Like we have great ways to do it digitally, but that doesn't mean that that we're not sitting next to markers or have a clipboard in front of us that we're modeling on, or pens. We want our kids to have those experiences too, right? So whether we invite them to turn and talk with a toy, or jot some thinking on a clipboard,
Yes.
Have a conversation, a micro conversation in the chat, right? Lots of short bursts of writing can happen even as young as first grade, as I saw today on the chat that I was in. But like, if we're writing a sentence here, a sentence there, a sentence there, it really quickly builds up to a lot of production from students. And over the course of a day, they're easily writing a paragraph or more of ideas and thinking. I think another thing to share with teachers as you're thinking about planning moving forward is, look for opportunities where you can double down on reading and math. And I think so much of that comes from content area studies. We're reading about science topics, and we're writing about science, like that true inquiry approach or that we can use with kids, where Katie and I refer to it in Amplify, I think, as sneaky reading and sneaky writing. Like they don't even know that they're getting extra minutes because it's so engaging, and it might be something that they've chosen as a topic of study or as a unit of inquiry. So I think we think about that, and then depending on your students, of course, considering your population, your families, um, really looking at that equity piece. And if Brett or Jacqueline can drop, there's a link to a blog from our dear friend Ken Shelton, and he writes in this blog a lot about what our considerations need to be for equity, and he embeds so many different links. So as you're reading his blog, please click out and read the other stories. But I think maybe if one of the people from our Heinemann team, there's another link to a post that talks about video bias. And I thought that's really important for us to all be thinking about as well. So we've learned a ton. We need to celebrate what we've done, but now be thinking about, okay, what went well? Where can we grow?
That piece is really huge, Kristen. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that we I think there are some people we're trying to do the work with our print resources and ensure that we're not promoting resources that have harmful stereotypes or that are outdated. But if we're quickly scrambling to use those digital resources, we need to be vetting them with that same lens to ensure the same thing. We don't want to go backwards in some of that equity work that we've been working towards, and it's a long road. We still have a long way to go, but that's an important
But
consideration.
the panic of
Now,
emergency teaching, right? Like
yeah,
made us not think about that or put that on the back burner or make
right.
choices that weren't as strong as they should be for our students based on the emergency.
Right, exactly. And I'm glad you brought up assessment because there was one more thing that I wanted to share, which was this component of I know a lot of teachers are missing being able to peer over kids' shoulders as they work. And you can't replace that, okay? You can't replace the ability to sneak up behind them and just kind of look over their shoulder while they're working to see the process, because as teachers we really do value the process. That's how I know where to intervene, right? If I'm able to watch as a child's working, that helps me see where is the breakdown occurring. There are some tools that they don't replace that, but they can gesture at that. And I think for example, like Seesaw has a whiteboard tool where kids can draw and talk at the same time. Or ClassKick is another one that I actually have really come to embrace recently. It's making its way onto my top 8, I think, because it's basically an interactive slideshow that kids can go through self-paced, or you can work with the teacher, but I can see all of what the kids are doing. I can see where they're at, right? And they can raise their little digital hand and you can go in and you can help them. And I think what I'm hearing is that especially for mathematics, a lot of teachers are really finding that so valuable because they can see kids as they're working and they can catch that process and jump in and provide that just-in-time assistance or that just-in-time nudge to get the kids going on the right track. So it's not a replacement, and that is a huge loss through this scenario. But if we use that coupled with synchronous conferences and synchronous small groups, we can definitely still gesture at that work.
Yeah, that's all really great sound advice. And I just think like my brain is so full and spinning and I have so many more things to ask. And I think, just looking at the time, we should probably wrap up soon. But one thing we didn't get to talk about a lot tonight is how teachers can collaborate to work smarter across departments and across grade levels. And so I just wanted to kind of put that out there that that might be something we can really dig into for the next time we're all together on Facebook Live. I'm seeing it's almost 8 o'clock Eastern time, and no matter where you are, you're either ready for bed or ready to eat dinner.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you know, in terms of like talking about those collaboration pieces and thinking about working smarter, and you know, we first have to take a little bit of time and celebrate what we've done so far, because like some studies are showing we made a leap of 5 years in a 2.5 month period, you know, in some of these digital pieces. So that's the starter. But then we think about smarter as a next step. And I would love to hear from our Facebook viewers, like what do they want to hear us think about or talk about, and you know, what matters to them, what are those burning questions, because we hate to leave people without like getting to the one thing that they maybe need to know in order to think about what's next.
Yeah. Well, we'll be looking forward to that conversation for sure. And we really appreciate your time tonight. I love hearing the two of you just go back and forth with your banter and telling us about all you've experienced and all you know. So thank you very much, Katie and Kristen, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Great
for
to be
having
with you.
us. Thank you to everyone who's listening or watching.
Bye, everyone.